subsidiary question. You have you any reason to explain for us your speech was was sufficient about North Korea. North Korea. You know more than us that Korea is North or Sur, is the same people, except the contemporary epoch. But the people in Korea, North and South, has the same language, the same culture, the same fundamentalistic story, etc. You know, presently, the Korea, the North and South, must have a dream, or if you prefer, a project. A project, Korea, between the two Korea, is to construct condition of possibilities union for having power and freedom and independence in the region, in Asia, and especially front of the American hegemony, imperialism, especially be careful, please, front of the President Donald Trump, who is a abnormal person, who is a personality, a president very special, very dangerous for Korea, for Morocco, for all world. For that reason, I advise you, be careful, please, be careful. Thank you very much.
Shall I answer right now? Okay. About the first question, a lot of these, extreme, features of South Korean development modernity were, in a sense, situationally driven. Okay, this is a matter of survival. So, if your life, your survival is at risk, there is nothing you cannot do, right? Yeah. So there is this kind of, survival stress and sense of urgency which have driven Koreans to adopt such extreme measures for economic development and modernization. So they do have some excuse, but unless you have, similar, stressful, what you call stressful, situational conditions, right? Well, I think it's better to moderate, to think more about sustainable, harmonious way of doing the things. So that's the kind of, the sentiment I have, and I'm actually envious of the Moroccan, policy of emphasizing the social aspect early enough. Yeah. Secondly, this North Korea issue, as I said, they in Vietnam and China very successfully. And then Vietnamese and Chinese communist governments are very much satisfied with Korean engagement in their economic development. North Korea is another communist country. So I think they can use their experience in entering this socialist economy and dealing with these communist governments for economic development, right? So, so that's in terms of this experience of entering socialist economy, and then it's kind of the jump starting their, this defunct socialist system, and even using these authoritarian environments for their industrial operations. Koreans are very good at this kind of. So I think the same can happen to the relationship between North and South Korea very easily. And then in terms of the population size and economic size between North and South Korea, right? Once political, military confrontations are reduced, the possibility of North Korean economy being jump-started by South Korean, capital is very high. It's very easy, even easy, I think. So it's not about technical or economic, problems, but rather, about this political and military, conditions, which involve not only North and South Korea, but United States and China. Because Americans are using North Korea as an excuse for maintaining the huge military influences there and so on. So that I don't know whether I'm answering you correctly, but yeah.
Thank you so much for this enlightening lecture. Your definition of compressed modernity concept is really very exciting. As you have started with historical context, I have two questions related to history and present time as well. Number one, how do Koreans consider or assess retrospectively the era of President Park? I mean the general, not his daughter. Number two, how your young fellow citizens perceive Japan. To what extent they are aware of World War II traumatizing legacy. I'm alluding here in particular to some dramatic gender issues. A final point, you have referred to Clifford Geertz. Let me add that one of his first books dealt with Islam in Morocco and Indonesia. He spent more than 40 years digging into Moroccan culture and complexity. Morocco is also a very complex country. Thank you.
President Park, interestingly, survives now thanks to population aging. Okay, the Korean life expectancy is extending more rapidly than any other societies in the world. So those people who were mobilized as industrial soldiers, and they were often praised as national heroes in this developmental jihad, right? So although many of them are now being poor, right? They still have very fond memory of being important as national hero. But now in the 70s, 80s, etc., right, in this post-industrial economy, they have no place, no symbolic social position to find in real world. So Park Chung-hee lives, even prospers in this context. But on the other hand, in terms of political development, right? As I said, institutional, this modernization. We have this Western, copied this democratic system, democratic party system. Even the political parties adopt the names from the Western, democracies. So you have Democratic Party, Republican Party, etc., right? But they don't have development justice party like Morocco, okay? Because this is institutional modernization, okay? And it somehow, discourage you from doing anything different from the Western examples. Strange. But on the other hand, real politics is all about development. Okay. And then this many, these 2 and even 3, 4 decades of this development have, created these people who, glorify Park Chung-hee and right. So they constitute enough political constituency. So right now, this conservative party is actually feeding on this kind of memories without actually fulfilling any developmental function. The young generation, Japan, well, now, what they like in their everyday life, like Korean pop culture, Korean K-pop, BTS, and their digital equipment, also electronics, etc. Right? They don't really see Japan here. Okay, they don't envy Japan. They don't use anything from Japan because Koreans' own things are actually far superior. But on the other hand, Japan is a tourist destination for young people. They taste globalization, So Japan is not existing there to young generations as any geopolitical economic or these things. But on the other hand, there is this internet nationalism everywhere, right? It's a very important staple for the international internet communities, right? It's the same here. So there is this internet bigotry between Korean and Japanese youth. Even Chinese youth are here, right? But I'm not sure whether this internet bigotry constitutes anything that is fundamental there. So these young generations are fundamentally different from. So they, in other words, unlike the elder generations who perceive Japan as a matter of survival and revenge, jihad, young generations don't have such kind of sentiment. And then, thanks for the, pointing out, Clifford Geertz in respect to Morocco, of course, I guess it's no wonder. I mean, let me tell you that the biggest intellectual influence from any social scientist is coming from Clifford Geertz. Don't tell this to my advisor at Brown University. Okay.
أود أن أعتذر أولا لك سيدي لأن أمامي تدخل هو الأخير لأننا نحن في الساعة 8.
Yeah.
Gender women.
Okay.
In political, and leadership.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for raising that issue. Women, I mean, they were all began with this. There's this systematic sacrifice of this social family as an arena for social reproduction, right? So the state did not want to spend too much money in stabilizing this, social reproduction and other welfare conditions. So for this to take place, women were there. So there's this systematic, automatic mobilization of women's contribution to take up this, social reproduction, sphere, and that allowed the state to minimize, social spendings and maximize the economic investment. So So now, young women don't really like that arrangement anymore. Actually, their parents, the young daughter's parents, don't like that at all. Okay, we are talking about the women, world most highly educated women, right? So on the other hand, you have the job market crisis. It's very hard to find a young man who will have stable, jobs, income to support you throughout life. So women want to be independent, and their mothers, especially middle class, the mothers who have, spent all their lives in taking care of these children's education and other social reproductive issues, are actually encouraging their daughters to pursue their social careers. And they say, it's okay. If you don't want to marry, that's fine. Be successful in society. That's their message. Okay. So their contribution was enormous. But these mothers don't like the same thing to happen to their daughters. So we have marriage crisis, fertility crisis, etc. But on the other hand, you have super, capable women like Korean golfers, the skaters and etc. Right? As well as these, teachers and in every social sector.
Thank you, Professor Chang, for this eminent and value conference. I would like to ask you something that of course, I do know that you didn't have enough time, but talking about education, and I would like to focus on the translation, as was manifested in your first book, as a driver for compressed modernity. We do have the same problem in developing countries since we were colonized. In our country, we have a bilingual language, but in your country, most of the rate produced graduate studies were in Japan and later in the United States, but you have constructed during the 60s, 70s, a mechanism to translate all the academic books into Korean language. How can you perceive that as a lesson for our experience in North Africa, for instance, since the language of academic production is French? How can we switch? Is it necessary to build up the same model, to create a community for translation, to help the community to follow up what is produced at academic institutions or not? Thanks.
Let me confess that whether I'm really a person who is capable of answering that, but I just will give you my opinion. Okay. First of all, Korea has a relatively big population. Right now, it is like 55 million, right? So it's enough, population enough. Also, because almost everyone goes to college, you have a prisoner. Arrested prisoner. Right? Your students are your prisoner, right? So if you write good textbooks, you can become rich by selling your textbooks to your students, etc. So there are enough population of readers of your writings in Korean. Okay. So, but on the other hand, it's quite common that many advanced level courses will use English textbooks and English materials for teaching. But somehow this recent tendency is that actually using English textbooks directly is now actually not being very much favored by Korean students right now. It's interesting, right? Yeah. So it's quite common that a lot of translations take place, and but on the other hand, I do think that Korean language It's very, it's kind of practical language to deal with these translations and other communication matters. So it is actually even being used. Actually, Korean government is trying to promote this Korean language, Korean alphabet, especially to a lot of these people, others in other societies to adopt Korean alphabet system as a surrogate, the alphabet for the languages, if they're existing or non-existing, tools of communication are not really, practical. UNESCO is actually highly thinking of this Korean alphabet system. So, I'm sorry that this is not the, the wise answer to you, but that much I can say to you.
مرة أخرى أعود إلى شكر الأستاذ المحاضر وأعلن اختتام هذه الجلسة. شكرا لكم جميعا.